2023, and thank you for joining. I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and the Chair of this meeting. For those that may be watching, as I know that we've got lots of interest in these meetings coming up, I will introduce the other members of our elected council that are here this morning. Starting on our left, we have Councillor Tim Wake. To his right, Councillor Alison Morse. To my right, we have Councillor Sue Ellen Fast.
Morning.
Joining us online, we have Councillor John Saunders and Councillor Judy Getty. For folks who are watching online or later on, note that the agenda package for this meeting, including all the staff reports, can be found at bowenislandmunicipality.ca and are available for download. And with that, I will look for approval of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda.
Point of privilege?
Yes.
Sorry, I can't rename myself, but this is Councillor Alex Jurgensen on Zoom as well.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Jurgensen. I think our corporate officer will be able to rename you.
Thank you.
Good to see you here. And with that said, I will look for a motion to adopt the agenda. So moved by Councillor Fast, seconded by Councillor Morse. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. And moving on to item 3, our lone item here on the agenda is 3.1, the Metro Vancouver application for rezoning and OCP amendment, Cape Roger Curtis, results of referrals to date. Daniel Martin, Manager of Planning and Development.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a presentation. I was going to say a brief presentation, but presentation tonight to go over what is contained in the report on your agenda. Make sure that comes up okay. So as the Mayor has said, we're here today to discuss a rezoning and OCP amendment application from Metro Vancouver for the proposed regional park at Cape Roger Curtis. So this council has seen this before, members of the public. It's quite small in this overhead, but just showing in terms of the process, this application was introduced to council February 27th, at which point council referred the application out to a number of committees, to agencies, and to public engagement. Sorry. Off my way through this. So we are here today to discuss results of the initial consultation and seek direction from council on how to proceed. And there, just for your, it's just that recommendation made at the February 27th meeting. So the application was referred to 9 different Bowen Island committees, one of which has not yet been established. So we conducted the referrals to 8 advisory committees. And the total responses are in the report. But what we've tried to do is try to pull just some of the themes from those 8 recommendations, and I'll say too, a number of the committees conducted initial responses as well, and a link to that is in the report. So there's quite a lengthy discussion and lengthy feedback from the various committees. But in terms of overall common themes, I think we found that the scale of the proposal could be hard for the committees to process and respond to, hard to make a simple recommendation. Some of the committees are used to referrals where they can, discuss it for half an hour and make a motion that they want to support it or not support it. Many of them struggled and found this harder, and requested additional information, additional time to consider, be able to provide responses. Common theme, general, but not, I don't know, universal, but general support for a regional park at Cape Roger Curtis. Much more discussion about proposed campsites, number of campsites, number of vehicle campsites, and then flowing from that concern about traffic impacts on ferries and on roads accessing the park, particularly Whitesail Drive, came up quite frequently in discussions. Concerns about potential negative impacts of the proposal. So much discussion and interest in phasing and in timing of the tying the development to performance metrics. So especially this last week after the committees, last week the committees discussing the proposed phasing for Metro Vancouver, and much discussion about how that phasing could be tied to performances. need for more detailed management plans on how the park would be operated. And then finally, committees, in particular the Finance Advisory Committee, talking about need to consider the impact on the municipality itself. So loss of potential property tax base, increased maintenance cost potential, increased things like costs on emergency planning implications, and costs in terms of financial costs for municipality and just volunteer and staff costs. So knowing like the work our emergency management does and all the volunteers that support that. The committee or council referred this to a number of agencies, the Bowen Island Conservancy, the Islands Trust, Vancouver Coastal Health, BC Ferries, and Squamish First Nations. So in your report, you'll see responses from the Bowen Island Conservancy and the Islands Trust Conservancy, who broadly speaking, I think have concerns about increased traffic from Thompson Road, which has been discussed as an alternate access to the park, and in particular impact on Ferry Fen through that traffic, be it foot or particular vehicle traffic. And concern about specific impact on sensitive ecosystems. So both those groups are quite familiar with the area, with Ferry Fen or with the Wild Goose Nature Reserve, and sort of site-specific concerns about that. Referrals to BC Ferries and Squamish First Nations are ongoing. So the report has some discussion of initial conversations with BC Ferries. We've had a number of good conversations with them and bringing up some of the things that come up in committees and through the public responses. And so we're anticipating a formal response from them, but it hasn't come to date. And then in terms of public responses, I mean, there's a number of letters in, I think the agenda tonight of the council meeting has been a constant theme of all of our council meetings has been public comments. I haven't collected them here or summarized them other than the report says, in general, I'd say lack of support for the campsites. Majority, but not unanimous lack of support, I think. And that's reflected. So this is taken from the Metro Vancouver summary of their public engagement. So they held 2 in-person open houses. They counted 375 attendees. They had 2 online webinars, 60 attendees. They had 2,300 participants submit feedback forms, 54% of which are from Bowen Island. I'm doing the math here, but that's about 1,200 responses from Bowen Island started the Metro Vancouver feedback form. And of those responses, so they said 1,029 respondents indicated they live on Bowen Island. 19% supported, 57 did not support, 9% were neutral, and 15% said they didn't have enough information to decide at this time. And then you can contrast this with their responses from people in the rest of Metro Vancouver, which saw 85% supporting the proposed park, so quite a split between Bowen Island residents and the rest of Metro Vancouver. Metro Vancouver, through this process and this round of engagement, has provided 3 additional technical studies. So the first, just giving an overview here, they provided an ecological background report on the lands that are subject to this application. So they based it on existing inventories and updated terrestrial ecosystem mapping. They identified ecological communities at risk and species at risk present on the lands, and they provided operational guidelines for the park. They provided a trip generation report from Bunt and Associates, who are a consulting firm. It considered the traffic impact of campsites compared to build out under the current zoning. And after reviewing the report and discussing it with, in particular, the Transportation Advisory Committee, BIM staff have asked for a number of clarifications on numbers in the report and expect a revised report. So I received the last update from Metro Thursday after we published, so Thursday evening, outlining their proposed amendments to the report. So we expect a revised report. And then I note that the report specifies the need for a transportation demand management plan and transportation impact assessment, both of which the report notes as being part of the rezoning application. So something that we would expect to receive through this rezoning process. And then Metro Vancouver provided a report called The Summary of Approaches to Implementation, Visitation, Operations, and Access. And some of the pieces in that report, so this one is the table that shows their proposed phasing of the park. So showing phase 1 coming in with basic trail and access, basic fencing signage, pit toilets, and then opening 1 group campsite, 14 vehicle campsites, and 17 walk, bike, and campsites. So about a third of the sites overall. They see that phase 1 when they would bring in the full-time park operator, the seasonal staff, the seasonal park shuttle, and investment in Bowen Island's multi-use path. And phase 2 in 2027 would then see essentially a second third of the campsites operational, see additional trails, boardwalks, interpretive signage, ongoing restoration of the site, and then phase 3 being that final third of the campsites and further park development. And then also in that report, there's discussion on estimating visitation, so both daily and overnight visits. And so the daily visits looked at Crippen Park and Minicata Park and other regional parks, and looked at in particular Crippen Park and the area around Killarney Lake is what Metro staff saw as more similar to the Cape Project Curtis Park. So different from Crippen Park around Snug Cove, where many people use it as a commute route or as just in and around the cove. You'll enter and exit the park multiple times, but thought that, okay, the area around Killarney Lake is more similar and that you're making a special trip to go there to recreate on the trails. It's probably more similar. Metro staff said several times in our committee meetings when discussing this, estimations are more of an art than a science. And so they're trying to look at comparables to come up with numbers. Okay. And then so you'll see, I'll go to the next slide to the recommendation, which is direction to draft amendment bylaws. But so just in terms of overall process, we're at the committee of the whole to discuss results of initial referrals. Staff would outline consideration of first reading, and at first reading, what we often do in rezonings and would be recommending in this rezoning is essentially requiring additional information that we would need before proceeding. And where I would distinguish this from other rezonings is we would be looking for additional information before referring the bylaws to the committee. So frequently we'll do that at the same meeting. Council will consider first reading, we'll refer the bylaws, and we'll require additional information. So the rezoning at 8 Arbutus Bay Road is an example where council gave first reading, referred it to committees, referred it to the Islands Trust, and requested more information. And what instead I believe staff would be recommending at the April 24th meeting is first reading and further information that staff would then return to council with the recommendation to refer to committees, to agencies, and public engagement. And feeling like the committees have given this great discussion. We had lengthy and great discussion. I know councillors were present for many of those for your respective committees, but feeling is going back without, committees have asked for more information, going back to them without the more information seems like it's not the most productive use of their time. It's better to come back to them when we have bylaws, but also have, here's some of the information you've requested so that they're in a better shape to make a recommendation. So the recommendation that's in your report is that the committee of the whole recommend that council direct staff to bring a report to the April 24th regular council meeting with draft bylaws to amend the OCP and land use bylaw to permit the Metro Vancouver proposal for a regional park at Cape Project Curtis, and to bring to that meeting any updates on responses to referrals made at the February 27th council meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Martin. I will open the floor up for questions. Asked.
Just a quick question. You said there were 3 new studies that had come in from Metro Vancouver, the ecological overview with the updated terrestrial ecosystem mapping, the transportation one from Bunt, and what was the third one again?
The third one is the Metro Vancouver report. So the one that's titled Summary of Approaches to Implementation.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Of course. We just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything.
Is that attachment 6? Because there's nothing here listed that starts with summary on the list of attachments.
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor Getty.
Thank you. I would like some clarification. I'm not sure who I'm asking the question of, but is it fair to say that if we recommend first reading, staff to prepare bylaws for first reading, that indicates that we're stepping forward and wanting to move forward in terms of exploring this, but we're not necessarily making any real strong commitments, that we need a lot of more information and we haven't been able to make up our minds both on the things that we can control and the things that are beyond our control. That be fair?
Maybe I will refer to the man in the hot seat.
To Councillor Getty, through the chair. I mean, first reading is sort of one of the approval steps the council gives to amendment bylaw. But, you know, bylaws are frequently amended at second reading, can be rejected at second reading, can return to first reading for further amendments. So it is a marker in terms of giving approvals. It's like one of the needed approval steps. And in some sense, it's like the strongest, I guess, step council can give at that process. Like you either give first reading or you don't give first reading. You can't give more than the first reading. You know, you have to give readings as they come. But so in no way does it sort of fetter council to say, okay, I gave first reading thinking I would learn more about it. I didn't, so now I'm not in favor of a subsequent reading.
All right.
Anything else, Councillor Getty?
Well, in terms of asking for more information, I'd be interested in knowing what the staff have gleaned from all of those meetings. I did a spreadsheet on a lot of the recommendations, and there were a lot of studies that were requested. And I'm concerned. I'm on the transportation committee, and there was a feeling there that the Bunt report was unreliable. And it would be very interesting if we're trying to get, I'm feeling like some of these reports are more marketing than research. And if we're trying to get information to help us all decide, whether or not to, and how, whether or not and how to implement this, I think we need really good, solid, reliable information and research. So is there some way that we can negotiate, I suppose, figuring out how to have collaboration in terms of the questions to ask these experts so that we've got, you know, I think the Bunt report had a low and a high for build out, and then certain assumptions made in terms of the campground. And some of those basic assumptions were quite unrealistic. So it would be very interesting if we could come up with some shared collaboration in terms of the questions to ask so that we can get more reliable information to build on. You know, that one was particularly difficult for people, that one report, and I haven't been able to get through much of the ecological report, and I know that there were a whole bunch of requests on that basis from some of the other committees, and I'm not sure if those questions have been answered with the report that was just filed, but I think that if we can collaborate in terms of how to set up the research, that would be very helpful as well. If that's possible, if the staff thinks that that's possible.
Would you like to respond to that, Brenner, or would you like a tighter question?
Yeah, I think I would just say through the chair, I think staff would like a chance to sit down and come up with a recommended list of what further information we would take. You know, we conducted 3 of the committee discussions were last week. We got the recommendations on Thursday, I think, just before we published. So I would like a chance for staff to sit down and come up with a tight list. I think I'll note too, in terms of especially the Bunt report, like the TAC recommended a peer review of that report. That's something the municipality has done in the past. Like if you look up, even the Cape Project Curtis rezoning application has on our website, you can find a transportation analysis and then a peer review of that transportation analysis. So it's not unheard of. And depending on the revised report that is prepared, that may be something that we would be recommending.
Thanks.
Oh, now all the hands are going up. So we'll go Councillor Witt, Councillor Fast, Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. That was an excellent summary of where we're at. With an awful lot of input, and that really did help clarify it. I was in the discussions at the Transportation Advisory Committee on the Bunt report, and I think what we're missing here is that the Bunt report or any report on traffic volumes assumes it's just going to be business as usual moving forward. And as many people as they forecast are going to come to the park for day use or camping are going to be able to. And it doesn't take into account the opportunity for a reservation system, some kind of reservation system on the ferry that allows a reasonable balance of residents versus visitors. So I don't understand how we can forecast any numbers when we haven't first figured out what we'd like to have in terms of numbers. And I feel if I look at the three phases that they've outlined, I think phase one is a good place to start. And then I think, depending on how that goes, and I think it's going to take a couple of years to work through that, see how those systems of shuttling people, can we get more people here via shuttles than we could via cars? And even the ecological impacts are going to depend to a certain extent on the numbers. So the numbers of people coming to the park and the number of cars coming to the park, to me, are the big issues. And I don't see how a study can tell us what that's going to be. So those are just my thoughts.
Thank you. Councillor Fast?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And I support the idea of staff having a chance to look at all the input from our advisory committees. Because I was in two committees last week. Parks, Trails and Greenways is on Monday night, which, by the way, also says that staff were in meetings in the evenings with the committee, so they haven't had a lot of time to do much looking of work on this project, let alone probably all their other things. So I think the Parks, Trails and Greenways Advisory Committee will be relieved to see the ecological overview with the updated terrestrial ecosystem mapping. That seemed to be one of the things I thought that they were looking for. But that information didn't all get voted on because the chair was ill and things like this. And people wanted to craft the recommendations carefully. Our volunteers are working hard and fast on this. And so it didn't come to staff until like Thursday afternoon, and they had to publish the agenda right away. So staff need more time, I think. That makes good sense to me. I wanted to say a couple of things about reports, just from my experience over the years, including as chair of the steering committee for the last time we updated the OCP, about 11 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever that was. And at that time, for transportation and growth scenarios, what the planners did was use BC Ferries projections, because they were the ones at the time who were putting the most work into where is growth happening, how are we planning changes to our system. You know, they're looking at their demand and resources and that kind of thing, and changes that are underway. So there are no perfect silver bullets here. It was like when you have to look to BC Ferries to see what they think your growth projections are going to be on Bowen Island. That was the state we were in then. Maybe we've got better info now, but there isn't good, solid info on those kinds of things in my experience. Oh, gosh, I had something else to say about that. Oh, I don't think my quick glance at the Bunt report, I didn't see that it took into account the other opportunities either, such as a multi-use trail and how many cars that might take off the road. You know, it is one of our goals in our Bowen Island Municipality climate action strategy is to have fewer vehicles on the road, more alternative transportation options. People want, from the last time we did this kind of planning, people wanted options so their children could bicycle to school safely, that kind of thing. I didn't see that in the Bunt report. And so, you know, I just wanted to say it's hard for transportation planners too to know our island and what's happening with the projects that we've got underway and how quickly Bowen Islanders can change their ways of transportation depending on what's needed, like when we had the smaller ferry a few years ago. Sorry, I'm taking too much time here, but I'll just say I've had experience using a reservation system to go to parks. For example, Rifle Bird Sanctuary, when COVID first came on the scene, you just used your phone and made a reservation and it said when, and you showed up at the gate and you got in. And the same with a year later in Niagara Conservation Area, outside of Toronto and Hamilton, the same. And it was actually, I preferred that because when you got there, you knew you were going to be able to get in. And so it was a reservation for park systems is already happening. Formal ones and informal ones, and it's out there already happening. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. It works. I liked it.
Thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Morse?
So a couple of things, and I'll try not to hack. This has been going on for years, and I dug out my Cape Roger Curtis plan, and interestingly enough, the original plan in 2008 had exactly very nice part where they're proposing it. So maybe we've got a second chance to retrieve something. The resolution that's proposed by staff, it's not clear to me. I did send around a proposed revised resolution to council members last night. The reason I've got trouble with it is the use of the properties, the resolution says to permit Metro Vancouver proposal for a regional park. We don't need to do a rezoning for a regional park. They can buy the land and have a regional park. That's been very clear in the process all along. The use of staff reports, the use of the properties in this application for trails, educational signage, and a natural park would be permitted under the current zoning. So the only thing we're rezoning for is maybe a few small things, but primarily for the camping issue. So I don't know why we're not being clear and saying to amend the official community plan and land use bylaw to permit camping within the proposed Metro Vancouver Regional Park at Cape Roger Curtis, because that's the issue. They can buy the land and start the park tomorrow. There's no need for rezoning to have a park there. So, and there is a timeline, which, you know, anybody who's selling land or anybody who's ever bought land knows that there's usually a timeline on when you're going to close. So if we're serious about considering camping, then that's got to be in the resolution. And that's what we need to deal with on the 24th. And just because it gets first reading, it means we're willing to consider it, but it doesn't, it does not prevent, you know, we've all sorts of, like the Cape Roger or the Common Point rezoning, the stack of the covenant is not thick with all the conditions and things they have to meet. So just because we give it first reading, all sorts of conditions can be put on. And the other thing is the cost of doing all these studies. If we're not seriously thinking about camping, then why, you know, they don't need to do all these studies. So, and a lot of the studies they would do anyhow in the normal process of developing a park management plan. So as far as I'm concerned, the motion needs to be that staff report back to council at its April 24th meeting with draft bylaws for first reading to amend the official community plan and land use bylaw to permit camping within the proposed Metro Vancouver Regional Park at Cape Roger Curtis. And then we can put all sorts of conditions on different things that have to be done to get to the various reading stages. So that's, to me, the process that we need to be following.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Then we can play with the wording of the recommendation when we get to that point. I'm going to go to Councillor Saunders and then Councillor Lake, and then also to welcome Councillor Jurgensen into the room as well.
Thank you, Mayor. I think as everybody else, I've I've been through the, several hundred letters that have been written and engaged with people one-on-one as much as possible with this as well. And my sense is that there's kind of overwhelming support that a park is better than not a park. But there's certain things that we have to know in advance. And camping is obviously the big bugaboo for many people. I think we've done a really good job here through the committees of creating an extensive list of things we need to know. And Councillor Getty did some good work over the weekend to kind of summarize as much of that as she could, as did the planner and our staff. So we know what we're asking for. This didn't get off to a good start in February, as we're all aware. My impression is that, looking at the information that's been provided to us of late, I think, and in particular, I'm looking at, for instance, the phased-in approach that they're suggesting, which at one point we were told point blank is not going to happen, and now it appears that, they're making an effort. And at some point, there's got to be good faith on both parties if we're going to make something happen here. And I think there's a ways to go for sure, but Metro has, shown the good faith in the sense of they've listened at least to some of the things we've said, it appears to me. And I think we need to make a move ourselves along those lines. And this is similar to what Councillor Morris just said, is, a first reading. And of course, we are making some other approaches that people are aware of that outside of just a first reading of a bylaw, indicating that, yeah, we want to do this. We got issues. We want to work them out. I think it's really important that we do this. If we're going to move ahead at all, we've got to decide, within the next week or so, and make a strong signal to them that, yes, we do intend to move ahead and we care about this. We've got a lot of issues. I think they're starting to address those issues with us. We need to continue to move forward and show our intent to, act in good faith. I think that they are doing the same thing at this point. Long road to go, but I think we got to take the next step. That's kind of my summary of what I see here. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Councillor Wade.
Thank you. Actually, I'll second what Councillor Saunders has just said. That really reflects where I'm coming from. But I do have a question with respect to Councillor Morse's suggestion. And I understand that a park use is within the allowable zoning, or is allowable within the zoning, the current zoning. My question is there anything that's allowable in the current zoning that we don't want to have in there in future? Like, once it becomes a park, does that preclude any development on those lots that would have been allowed under the zoning? Because if it doesn't, I think we should be doing that. So what is I guess the question is, what is the process of actually making it a park exclusively?
Through the chair, so the rezoning applications to rezone the 24 properties is passive park with this zone variation to permit overnight use of up to 100 campsites. So I think my recommendation to address Councillor Morris's concern is to just include the words. So where the recommendation says to permit the Metro Vancouver proposal for a regional park, and then add with overnight use of up to 100 campsites, if that's the direction council wants to go. And that's mirroring language from their rezoning application. The other thing we do sometimes in recommendations is just say, permit rezoning application RZ and then our application number, but sometimes that's not very specific and people may not know exactly what it means. So it's clear using the language. In terms of the rezoning, so absent a rezoning, we've said Metro Vancouver could operate a regional park with trails and signage, and that's about it. The land would still have the development potential that's permitted in the rural residential zone. So in theory, Metro could build dwellings on their properties, or they could sell them as residential lots in the future. Through the rezoning proposal to rezone it as passive park, it would take away those development rights. So their application would remove the ability to build dwellings or stables, kennels.
Thank you.
That's best.
Yeah, thank you. I like the addition of that little bit of text because by adding the words at the end of what is recommendation number 1, for a regional park at Cape Roger Curtis with overnight use of up to 100 campsites, that tells them that we're looking carefully at what they've applied for and that we're considering their application. And I also think that it sends a clear message to busy politicians who might be wondering what they're in the deluge, shall I say, of Bowen Island public engagement. We have a rich participatory culture. I have a feeling that Metro Vancouver representatives on the Parks Committee might be feeling surprised by getting so many letters. And that's the way we function here. Personally, I think that's partly why we've got such a high voter turnout and why we have a beautiful rural environment that people are passionate about caring for and having their say and all that kind of thing. That's partly why we've got so much beauty and nature around us. So what I'm getting to is saying I support that addition to the recommendation, but I also think it's good that we respect their application and that also sends a message. And they've applied for rezoning to passive park, and I think that will also provide clarity into the future because passive park is like Crippen, which people know and are familiar with from 40 years. This is the 40th year that since Metro Vancouver bought Crippen lands. And so I think by saying that it's passive park, then people won't be, people can have more of a sense of surety about what kind of park it's going to be. It's not an active athletic park. It's not a completely closed off nature park. There's different uses for different types of parks in our land use bylaw. And passive park makes it clearer what they're applying for. And it also gives members of the public, citizens here and on the Lower Mainland, gives us all a chance for participatory democracy to work its magic in terms of people can have a say in how the park develops. If we just do a blanket OCP amendment, for me, that leaves out local input or future municipal input and that kind of thing, unless we build in some kind of co-management clause or annual liaison meetings or some kind of ongoing letter of agreement. But I think I like the way that having the rezoning on here makes it all clear and transparent what everybody's talking about and gives people the chance to have their input. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Morse.
One thing that came up at the housing committee meeting was if they're going to have workers on site and people working in the park, we have very limited employee housing. And therefore, hopefully there would be a provision where there could be some small residences on site for us park workers, not just.
Thank you. And through the chair, I know that's something that we have discussed with Metro Vancouver. I was just trying to look if it's listed in their actual rezoning application, which I don't see, but discussion of potential for essentially overnight accommodation for staff. I think it's implied in their application where they talk about supervised camping. So the implication being that there's staff there overnight as well. And so, yeah, it's something that has an advisory committee flag.
There's a difference between overnight and that staff person living on the island and then going out and doing their shift and staying overnight. So you might be able to just think about, maybe 3 or 4 small housing units somewhere, just so that exception for staff.
Yeah, and I think that would make sense similar to like the Crippen zoning actually contains zoning for dwellings at the moment, which in the past Crippen has had caretakers live and they don't now, but have in the past similar provisions at this proposed park.
Councilor Getty.
Thank you. My impression is that the vast majority of people are positive in terms of the whole idea of conservation, that this is a well-loved and well-known and well-used part of the island that has been through a whole lot of very divisive debates and is now. But I think with the UNESCO biosphere for Howe Sound, that there's even more incentive in terms of all of the issues around conservation. So I think that that is something that unites us both on island and with Metro. I think once we get into the park and park uses, you know, and all of these studies have not included day visitors and how they come and go and what they're doing there and all the rest of it. But I think once we get into some significant numbers of visitors, if this in fact turns out to be a draw because it is such a fantastic place and whatever we set up in terms of education and trails and I don't know, guides and whatever, that begins to bubble up and stir up a lot of the controversy. And I don't feel that we're anywhere close to consensus. And there's a strong yes, and there's a strong no, and there's everything in between. Yes, except for, and no, unless, and, you know, variations on those themes. And I think that's what a lot of the questions and the suggestions and the requests are from the committees. And I think the committees are working really well, and they're coming up with all sorts of considerations and concerns and critiques, and that we need to work through that system. So I understand that there's all sorts of things happening at Metro and that they need reassurance. I'm prepared personally to move in that direction so that we don't abandon this at this point, that we continue with the exploration and the research. I don't want to give them necessarily false hopes in terms of it's a slam dunk. That's not how this is played out. But I don't want us to throw it all away at this point. I think that there's potential. Personally, I'd like to see the phased in plan that they've got switched around so that we do group camping, and we've got some educational aspects, and we've got more supervision, and we figure out where all of the stewardship issues are, and we do a lot of thinking and planning in terms of how we protect some of the rare areas and where they are, identifying them. So, you know, phasing in is maybe a chunk of time in terms of research before we start anything, and then figuring out what's the least impact and starting if there's any kind of camping, if we can agree on that it's the most highly managed and that it's the most rewarding. You know, if we want to become a world-class long-term into posterity kind of park, we can't ruin it at the beginning, and we need to figure out, you know, what's the ideal that we're working towards, and how do we get there? And I think that that's of Metro's staff, hopefully the politicians, and I think the Bowen community. So I think we need to think big and bright and beautiful, and figure out something that we can in fact be proud of. And if we can't get there, then, you know, then it's a wash. But you know, I don't think we're at the point where we can figure it all out yet.
Thank you, Councillor Giddy. Anyone from folks that haven't spoken yet? Councillor Jurgensen, do you have any questions or comments?
Through the chair, if we go ahead and recommend staff come back to the bylaw for first reading, do we then necessarily, and this is just a process question, do we then necessarily have to approve that first reading? Or is there the option to send it back to staff for additional amendments or defeat it altogether?
Through the chair, absolutely, there's opportunity for council either to amend the bylaw at the council meeting. Frequently, there's sort of minor amendments to refer the bylaw back to staff to make amendments and specify, amend it in these ways, or an opportunity to vote against a bylaw and, defeat the reading of a bylaw. So any of those options would be available.
To the chair, thank you. Follow-up question to that. If a bylaw was defeated in that manner, does it then become, it defeats the first reading of it, but does the process then stop, or is there another mechanism that would need to be engaged to stop the process at that point?
Through the chair, typically defeating reading of a bylaw is viewed as defeating the application, absent sort of council direction. So council could conceivably, defeat the first reading of a bylaw and then direct staff to amend that bylaw in certain ways and bring it back for reconsideration of first reading. Generally, my recommendation would be if council is not satisfied with the bylaw, it is generally, supportive of the process and the proposal moving forward, but not supportive of a particular, the way an amendment bylaw is crafted is to instead refer the bylaw to staff to make changes to bring it back rather than defeating it on the floor and then sort of dealing with fallout. So if the intent is, well, we just need changes to this bylaw before we're comfortable, just send it to staff and don't consider the reading.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Morse?
Giving the bylaw first reading gets it on the table for discussion. A lot of the studies, the management plan would be a separate document. A lot of what everybody's wanting to see would be covered off in covenants that would be registered on the land, that would be identified between first and second reading or second and third reading and worked out. If we want a joint input into the management committee, then that would probably be covered off in a covenant. And as those conditions are developed, those covenants can be removed. But the bylaw isn't going to have, we need this study before we give it fourth reading written in the bylaw. That's going to be in the staff report and will be, if we don't get this report, then we're not going to go to second reading type of thing. So the bylaw I'm envisioning as being a fairly simple, straightforward bylaw, not with a lot of, we've got home occupation bylaws where we've got some conditions in there. So, but do you want to enshrine the conditions in a covenant or in the bylaw? And they could be added to the bylaw at second reading if we go further. So to keep the process moving forward, I think the resolution, as I suggested and as Councillor Fast has tweaked, is what we have to do.
Through the chair, yes, I agree. I think as I envision, particularly the land use bylaw amendment, that it's a fairly straightforward bylaw. It'll say, the area outlined in black is rezoned to P1, that's a park, and the area outlined in whatever is P1C, the zone variation, and that zone variation permits. They can break down what is specifically permitted within those areas for campsites. And then typically in rezonings, we would impose conditions through a section 219 covenant that would outline conditions that are required on the land.
Okay. I'm going to jump in with a few questions if I may. Thank you for all your work on this. I know that this has been an issue that's taken up almost all of the oxygen in the room on the island over the last little bit. And the pieces that I'd like to get clear on is there's, referring to one of your earlier slides, there's having the first reading done and then getting the information that's been requested. And it feels as if part of the role of this committee of the whole is to, I think Councillor Getty and the work that she did in putting together that spreadsheet of all the asks, and there's a lot of them. And part of what I think that we're tasked with here is going to be to sift through all of those recommendations and requests and asks and get them succinct in a way that we're really getting the information that we need in order to make it some kind of decision. And that's the process that I believe that we should be driving towards, that the process itself of having 3 readings, it will have to go to a public hearing. I would probably like to see some town halls or open houses done as well, so that by the time that we get past at least the public hearing or even before 3rd reading, that we've got a really clear idea of what this looks like. And I believe in the one of the documents that Metro Vancouver provided is that they have our rezoning running along their engagement process. So there's the 3 phases of the Metro Vancouver engagement process. The phase 1, which I think for our community feels like it's happened a bit late, was just a listen and learn. But the pieces that we haven't seen yet are the actual park design and concept of what this thing actually looks like. So I think we can use that process to get to a clear detailing of okay, well, what is this thing actually going to look like tangibly, so that we can make a decision there. On that, begin getting to that clarity. It was referenced, I think it's part of the Bunt study, that there's going to be proposed amendments and there's additional studies. So from the planning perspective in that slide of doing first reading and then asking for more information, what are the key pieces of information at this point that either, planning or parks, would see that needs to be requested and asked for after, sifting through all of our committee referrals?
To the chair, as I sit here, I think most readily I can identify those pieces identified in the Bunt report in terms of the additional studies that they are requesting. I think some of the other pieces we'd be looking for is, and I don't know if it's the park, I understand like Metro does the park management plan. And I think it's details on that and more specificity. So some of their plans will talk about, well, we're looking at these ways of implementing steps. So, park shuttle or contribution to multi-use path as ways to drive alternate access. And so possibly it's looking for, okay, let's dive into that. Let's get a little bit more clarity in terms of what that means. How does council proceed with those? I think sort of in summary, those are the main pieces that I can think of at this moment, but I would appreciate an opportunity to sort of revise that. And I think if council has thoughts at this meeting as well to bring into that meeting on the 24th would be valuable.
Okay. So in that, given that there's, so the phase in that's been presented to us feels like it's a step in the right direction, but it's a small step. So what I'm curious about is, given that we're going to have information come back on transportation, on visitor use, on management plans, on wildfire safety, on ecological impact, that's one piece, that's one thread. The second thread is that there is a widespread concern in our community that if the rezoning and the OCP amendment are granted, that then Metro Vancouver will just do whatever they want. And I believe what I'm hearing around the table from this council and from other threads in our community is that, well, we're kind of up for this, but we'd like to see a much more collaborative approach. We'd like to see an approach where Bowen Island is at the table, the community is at the table, bodies like the Conservancy are at the table, both Bowen Island and possibly the Islands Trust, given the impacts to Ferry Fen that are being contemplated in some of the alternate transportation routes that we're seeing. So municipally, aside from just a straight up yes or no on the rezoning, what tools are available to us that would allow us to write in conditions, that would allow us to monitor the phase in, that would allow us to, set some gates on those phases as they're developed, so that our citizens can have some assurance in security and feeling that, we're not just going to experience a tidal wave of usage from Metro Vancouver, or that once the rezoning is granted, that it's just going to be, a free for all over at the Cape.
I think that's an excellent question. So typically, like in rezonings we have where there are phases, they're tied to, amenity contribution, for example. So the Grafton Lake development has phases and has like the covenant specifies. It's like when you do this phase, you provide these amenities and you provide these amenities. What's harder and more challenging in terms of, my experience here, frankly, is tying in that performance-based piece. So that it's not just saying phase 2 is triggered by, you've put the park shuttle in, you've put in the multi-use path operational, proceed to phase 2, but how to have that sort of more adaptive approach is something that we're researching and asking help with our our legal firm and whatever else in terms of help of how those can be captured. Because I think that is a key concern we're hearing is, if Metro Vancouver says, yes, trust us through the process, and people say we want some certainty that it's not just approved that it can happen up to 100, even if things are going badly, but how do we have an ability to adapt as we go forward? So I think I don't have a clear answer today, but something that we would be looking into in terms of how the phasing can be captured and how it can be tied more closely to performance and ability to adapt.
Right. And I know, one of the documents that's been referenced frequently, and I don't know if it's a core document of Metro Vancouver. I know it was prepared by UBC, and it was their measuring and managing park carrying capacity document, where they speak to some of the efforts done both in BC parks and particularly in Parks Canada, where there is a visitor use management framework, like an internationally recognized visitor use management framework put into place for some of those adaptive management pieces. And what I'm curious about is how to align that with the municipal process that, maintains the integrity of Bowen Island's community and social fabric, as well as sort of our ecological assets as well, but is also constructive, that has, both Bowen Island, its stakeholders, as well as Metro Vancouver come to the table in a way that would allow us to transcend some of the yes or no or go, no go thinking that we're seeing in the community right now. And whether in your discussions with Metro Vancouver staff, whether they have the appetite for that or whether there is flexibility, it does seem like there are some initial steps in the right direction. We've been able to reframe the conversation, but would you foresee that room both for collaborative process, for visitor use management framework, for some more integrated and recognized thought leadership? Is there the opportunity for that in this process as we move forward with Metro Vancouver?
I think and I'll speak for the CAO too, in terms of in our staff discussion with Metro Vancouver staff, we see, genuine desire to make this park a success. And so we've seen some of their documents, continuing to explore ways to address concerns and make us, their goal is a successful park at the Cape. And so their desire, all their conversations, all their documentation is about a successful park means not having a negative impact on Bowen Island and looking for ways to ensure that takes place. And they're aware of that. They're aware of, the location of it, both in terms of ecological importance and beauty, but also its location at the other side of the island through a residential street to access the park. So I think, sort of as we go through, it's finding ways that either commitments they've made in their documentation or, things the council would like to see their commitment to, and then finding ways to tie that it's saying, okay, council is okay moving forward with this based on that these things will be delivered, and finding a way that it is tied and we can have an ongoing conversation that a potential rezoning is not the end of the conversation, that it's not the rezoning takes place and then it's like, okay, go do what you will, but that it's still an ongoing conversation.
Thank you. To the CEO.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And just adding on to what Daniel said, my discussions and conversations with the CAO of Metro have also been quite positive, and we've discussed the notion and idea about how to have a phased-in approach that has adequate levers available to the municipality such that if the performance isn't there, then the next phase may not continue and those types of things. So they're aware of our concerns around that and supportive of that at a staff level. There are some mechanical or measures available to us through legislation, but we're not certain if it's the right tool that's available. It's the phase development agreement, which is available through the Local Government Act, but it may not be the right tool. So we're doing more research on that. I think that the key part that we keep hearing from Metro too is that they come back to us and say the rezoning is only the first step, and that they're really looking for the approval to allow for the overnight camping ability, and that once they get through the rezoning and the green light to be able to advance, then the real work begins around the park planning and the detailed park plan itself, and that will take quite a bit of time. And there'll be from their words, there'll be a lot of opportunity, a lot more engagement. There'll be perhaps more of that collaborative approach that we're hearing a lot of concerns and questions about too.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up to that, Councillor Jurgensen, I see your hand up, so I'll add you to the speakers list. For clarity, for the folks in the room, what is a phase development agreement? What are those generally used for?
It generally, I'm not sure that it's been used for what we're trying to apply it to, so that's why we need more research. Typically, it's used for larger developments that may have require rezoning to increase density to a much larger number than what originally occurred. And the community, rather than allowing it to all happen at once, has a desire to see that phased in over time. And so sets out markers in the ground that says, you can have X number of units by X date, and you shall provide these amenities corresponding with that first phase. And then once you reach that, you move to phase 2 and you get X more number of units and you get these other amenities that come along with it. There's all sorts of different ways you can structure the actual agreement. Typically, they're a 10-year phased in approach. And so there is legislative provisions that allow for that. And we've seen that kind of phasing here on Bowen, but it's never been applied in the way that we're thinking about it with these more specific metrics around performance, because it's not so much that we could easily say, okay, you can have start with 35 campsites, and then you get through that phase and then you get it to add another 25 or what have you. What we want to see is, okay, you have phase 1 is 35 campsites, but how does that work? How is that impacting the island and the community, and what are the metrics to measure that? And so the typical legislation and approaches, at least I'm not aware of, have those sort of abilities to measure performance. But generally, with that phased-in agreement, there is always a provision to terminate the agreement. And I don't know if that would result in us being able to say, okay, well, we're going to terminate the agreement because we're not happy with the performance, and then that's all you get and you don't get any more kind of thing, or what happens there. So we need more time to do some more research, and Planner Martin probably had some more to add to that too. So.
Just to add to the CEO in terms of it's something that we've looked into. It's something that typically you'd see, in big cities for we're going to build 3 towers. Tower 1 is phase 1. It's in the developer certainty that the local government isn't going to, take all the amenities at the start for the first tower and then change the zoning for the subsequent towers. So it's trying to build certainty for both parties into it, but having, amenity provisions and schedules and everything else. Whereas typically on Bowen, we've done it, through covenants that capture it in a sort of simpler, more concise way. We don't, partly because we don't have that level of complexity of development as you'd see in, 300 unit towers, but something we continue to explore.
I'm going to go Councillor Jurgensen, Councillor Morris, and then Councillor Fast.
Okay.
Oh, and Councillor Getty.
Through the chair, something that was proposed when we were looking at the Bowen Cider House application was approving a certain number of usage and then reviewing it on a regular basis and upping it if the neighborhood agreed. As part of the good neighbor agreement. I'm wondering if a similar thing could be used here where you put in the covenant that there's say 10 campsites, for example. And say they'd be reviewed in 6 months by council, at which point the covenant could be amended to, increase it to 25, for example. And continue that approach. Is that something that would be a viable option here?
Through the chair, I guess a section 219 covenant could restrict the use of land and say, okay, despite the zoning, you're limited to a smaller number, and then have a provision to say this is how you would increase the number. I'm not sure to the extent you could use that type of agreement to override the zoning. But in theory, something like that could be in place. I think the difference from this to the cider house is sort of, it's maybe not just immediate neighbors, but as we're looking at sort of island-wide impacts. But something like that could be potential.
Councillor Morris, Councillor Fast, and Councillor Getty.
We've done that type of phase-in where you only get a certain number of lots, or if you don't deliver X, the 20 lots you're going to get are now only 10. And that was done in the Cowan Point development with the golf course.
Right.
So there is precedent for that in the wording. So, a lot of these issues I think can be dealt with through the covenant. We would put on before we got to fourth reading. Fourth reading might be a year from now.
Right.
Till we've worked through some of the details. And the management plan, I think there are processes for management plans for other sort of park expansions. There's very much a community process.
Yeah, I haven't been through the chair. I haven't been through Metro Vancouver Park planning process, but it seems quite extensive. And they do speak to there being a lot more engagement through that process.
Councillor Fast.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a few things to say, and then I'm going to move the motion. First off, I won't talk about biodiversity here, but I feel like this is one of about 18 folders I've got, and this is something I've been working on for 25 years. I'm for biodiversity. I think we need all the species if we want to have healthy functioning ecosystems, especially in a changing climate. I was really happy in the ecological report to see a bunch of the studies that I knew of referenced, some that I'd worked on, and as the community's been working on them through the years. I won't take too much time, but I just want to say it's not only somebody mentioned UNESCO, it's not only the IUCN who is focusing on global extinctions and saying we need to preserve more biodiversity, and countries have signed on to that, but it's also code red for humanity in terms of climate. And I think this proposal could be a win-win for both of those, for both us and Metro Vancouver. This is only first reading, and I certainly think we should pass it because there's so much engagement, so much support for the idea of a park. I think, I'll just say I've worked in lots of parks, including ones with campgrounds and in my career. And they can be wonderful places. I've camped with my family as a child, hiking in, camping under the stars to places. I've camped from a bicycle. These kinds of things are not, I'm used to the ideas. I worked in Edmonton also 40 years ago, as it happens, when they had just, the city had just opened up its Capital City Recreation Park, the River Valley Bike Park system. So it was just when all these new paved bike paths had been put into the River Valley. And I was one of the first people on them, on my bicycle. As a young career person, I didn't own a vehicle, but I was going out to meet school groups and families from neighborhoods to do nature programs. And just the use I saw growing as people discovered these trails and more cyclists out on them, as well as one fellow I remember in a power wheelchair was out there like every day. There was this smooth gliding through nature, is beautiful. And they took it right up, and that was 40 years ago. So I certainly see that it's possible, it's feasible, and that we could perhaps meet some of our shared goals. For example, our multi-use pathway on Bowen, part of our transportation plan, part of our climate commitments, and part of what people told us in the transportation plan that they wanted for children to be able to get around, or for seniors. And here's the Regional Greenways 2050 plan that is part of Metro Vancouver Park Committee's commitment. Describes the region's shared vision for a network of recreational multi-use paths for cycling and walking, connects residents to large parks, protected natural areas, and communities to support regional livability. And that's in Transport 2050 as well, with TransLink improvements to transit and buses. And the whole thing, and Bowen's Cross Island, our multi-use pathway, is in there as indicated already as a regional greenway network part. And then the Spirit Trail already comes down to Horseshoe Bay on the other side, and Metro 2050, the whole big regional growth strategy, was adopted by the Metro Board last month. So all of these are shared objectives. We're working together, and they already use words like funding and operations and things like that for Greenway, which is what we call a multi-use pathway. So I see win-win situations. I see it as feasible. I've seen them work before. Crippen Park is a success story. And I've got more to say, but I won't go into all that. I'll just say I saw 7 or 8 e-bikes by Bowen Island residents parked down behind the library when we had a conservation event a couple of weeks ago. E-bikes are here. They're a game changer. The hills don't matter. And I think that the future can be better than today. And so I'm going to move the recommendation.
I'm going to pause you just for 1 second. I'd like to clear the speaking list. So Councillor Getty has her hand up, and then I'll come back to you for the motion. Sorry, Councillor Wake.
I think that part of what I'm hearing is, and somebody mentioned the word trust, and I think that we're off to a rough start, and that for me personally, there's some history in terms of Davies Orchard, and I think that Metro has done extremely well with the bulk of Crippen, but there are issues of trust. And I think that we can possibly, there's potential in terms of resolving all of that and having a really good working partnership. But I guess the process to date has been a steep learning curve, it appears, for most of Metro, some of the staff. There's a part of me that thinks that it's absolutely remarkable that they've been working on Bowen for 40 years and they don't recognize some of these issues. But they haven't lived here, so it is far more dramatic and noteworthy when you live here. A lot of things that are going on with transportation. Is there a possibility of working out some kind of joint management process so that Bowen has more input and maybe not veto power? It is a private property situation, but some sort of agreement that settles some of those issues and questions, so that we start off with here's Metro's idea, here's Bowen's concerns and restrictions, and this is the joint management goal. I don't know if Metro Parks has that kind of an agreement with any other municipality or any other stakeholder group, but if that's something that could be ironed out before we plunge into this, and what feels like taking a big leap of faith, maybe that's the way to try to work it.
Thank you, Councillor Getty. And Councillor Fast for the recommendation.
Thank you.
I just ask a process question.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if before Councillor Fast actually moves the motion, that she tells us what she's proposing to move.
How about, I'll just throw it out here as a suggestion. The motion is made. We just hold off on seconding because we can massage language a little bit there and then second and get into debate. Sound agreeable?
Can we get public comment before we make a motion?
We will have public comment tonight. We did check in this morning to the audience here whether there was any comments in the room. We didn't hear any.
Can we now?
It would be up to council whether we want to require an amending of the agenda to add public comments. Councillor Morse, and then.
Well, I guess we didn't have public comments on the agenda, so just thinking if we just invite general public comments, some people that would have made them didn't come because they weren't on the agenda.
There will be public comments this evening as well, because this is going to council this evening. But what I'm looking for is whether there's appetite to amend the agenda to have public comments at this point before a recommendation is made. Councillor Jurgensen?
I so move.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Jurgensen. Open the floor for public comments. Is there a seconder?
I have a question.
Yes.
How much time do we have before our next, we have school kids coming?
Right, what time?
They're coming at 11:40.
11:40.
I just want to make sure we've got time to pass our motion so that we can make our whatever decision we're going to make today. And so how long is the public comment period?
I think we'll open it for, as we do in a standard way, it would be 15 minutes, and then we would divide that to a maximum of 3 minutes across the speakers. Is there a seconder for Councillor Jurgensen's motion to open for public comments?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Getty. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, open the floor for public comments. Raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we're winging it a little bit. So here's what we're going to do. What we will do, because this seems in the room, what we have is a very orderly and interested audience. Take public comments. How many folks wish to address council? 1, 2, 3. Margaret would like to address council twice.
No, that was
Okay.
big street down.
And any online?
Don't see any hands up.
Okay, if you would like to make a public comment and you're online, please use the raised hand function. Our corporate officer will note your desire. Okay, we are going to close the list for 3 public commenters here in, and 4 from former Councillor Hocking in the room as well. So we'll do a maximum of 3 minutes each. The timer will be set for 2 minutes and 50 seconds. So you'll have the opportunity, actually we'll do 2 minutes and 40 seconds because sometimes it does take to get that final thought home because we have such an articulate public. We want to give you the time. And I will call up the hands in the order that I saw them. I think I saw Ms. Underhill first.
Could we speak from where we sit or?
I prefer that.
Okay, fine. One comment, the phased approach as was in the planner's report. I'm initially reading that, I found it very confusing because I read it as phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and I'm inferring that it's phase 2 is a cumulative approach. It's an addition to phase 1, and phase 3 is an addition to phases 1 and 2, but the chart does not make it clear. And so I think perhaps in future reports, if that could be made clear too. The great unwatched as well as anyone else who cares. And the other point I wanted to make is that the unfortunate part of requiring the proponents or the applicants to make or have prepared reports on any number of issues such as ecological and transportation and ferry capacity and all that kind of good stuff is that they're requesting those reports and paying for the reports and setting the parameters for those reports. And I don't think you can go too far wrong on the ecological sense of counting the number of eagle nests and herring pairs and squirrels and all that kind of good stuff. But my feeling on reading the ferry report was that they were having the questions answered in the way that they wanted to ask them. And we, Bowen Island, are not necessarily getting the answers to the questions that we want answered because we're not paying for these reports. So, and I think councillors have expressed a lot of good points with respect to the concept of a collaborative management approach or requesting information, but that I see as a real weakness in the whole process up till now is we're being asked, and as Councillor Getty said, trust issues, we're being asked to accept all these wonderful reports made by people with lots of letters after their names, and the reports are fundamentally meant to serve the interests of the applicant, not all of us. So that's all my.
Thank you. And that does raise an interesting question that perhaps we can use that with some flexibility of the meeting structure here is, and maybe to the CEO, because I saw our planner coming halfway through, is if Bowen Island municipality needs specific information, are we able to undertake that and pass those costs on to the proponent, or how does that work generally?
Yeah, well, if I can first address a point that was also made about some of the quality or data in these reports sometimes draws question or concern. And when it's obvious to staff and it's clear that it's a data issue that we would be concerned with, we identify it directly back to Metro for example, with that fund report, they use a metric of assuming that there's 3.6 people per household in the development area. We don't use that metric. We use a metric of 2.5, which would reduce the number of trips perhaps that they've assumed for the household trips. And so we relay that message immediately once we identify that. And then we relay back any additional comments or concerns that are raised through committee or public engagement as well. But we take it very seriously and we go through it, looking at it from a technical perspective to make sure it makes sense to us. And if it seems to be causes of concern, we raise it right away. Additionally, council can request additional reports to be done, and staff could undertake those reports and have those costs charged back to the applicant. It would have to be notified to the applicant. The applicant would have to be in agreement with that too. So it's not something that we could just undertake ourselves and send them an invoice without their agreement.
Thank you. Let's clear the speakers list first, then we'll.
Yep. I'm just going to add to the point about we can set, I think in our development approvals bylaw, we can ask for information and we can set the parameters, and in some cases we've done jointly agreed on who will be the consultant doing the work. So that's, and for biology reports and stuff, they've all got professional accreditations they have to account for too.
And similarly through the third party or peer review, for lack of a better term.
Okay, Ms. Morton, Ms. Johnson, and then Mr. Hawking.
Thank you for the opportunity, everybody, and to the chair and council. I really appreciate what I've heard here today. I think you very much captured what the conversations in the community are without the emotional content. I would like to speak in relationship to what Councillor Getty raised. It's a conversation I've been having. I think a co-management agreement would go a long ways towards addressing the trust issue. And former Councillor Maureen Nicholson told me that there is a precedent, there is another joint management agreement between one of the municipalities in Metro Vancouver and a park, and I forget which one, but I'm sure she would be happy to tell you. So it would be a great one to research and see if something like that would work for us. Thanks.
Thank you.
May I respond briefly to that?
Yes.
So just through the chair, just responding to that comment, thank you for that comment. And yeah, I believe Metro may have two co-management arrangements, one with the First Nation and one with local government. And typically the partner has a significant contribution to the park in some way, shape or form. And I'm not sure that what we're contributing would be considered to meet that test, but it's not something that is but it is something worth following up with and engaging with them about it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I'm probably going to touch on a number of points. So it's more reaction to the conversations and discussions, which were really outstanding. So I thank you all for your level-headedness in this very emotional topic. And it's a very, very difficult topic and discussion for all of us. I don't think no one is against conservation. I think everyone would like to have Cape Roger Curtis conserved. It's an unfortunate thing that it is where it is, because I think the traffic across the island and through White Sails is still something that's not being appropriately discussed. There's a lot of trust me that's going on with Metro, and as Councillor Getty mentioned, I think that is a big issue. It would help if we could see a little bit more trust on their side. I love the idea of starting with group camping, and I think that might be a place to start our trust us side of the conversation. So I really like continuing with that kind of discussion. I'm confused as to what our timeline is. I understand there's a May 9th deadline, which is just around the corner. So while we talk about all this additional information that we need, personally, I don't know how much time we have and exactly what's going to happen. So just a comment there if anybody has anything to say there. There also doesn't seem to be enough attention being given to the day use impact. It is definitely focused on the camping, but when we look at the tens of thousands of people that come to Crippen, are we assuming that it's not going to be any additional day use people, that those people are just going to spend a couple hours in Crippen and then go spend a couple hours in Cape Roger Curtis, so there's really not going to be any incremental change? But there we're talking about tens of thousands of potential new feet on the ground annually, and there really doesn't seem to be a lot of attention being given to that. So that's something that I wonder about. When we talk about co-management, I see dollars involved and extra work on the staff. So I just wonder, again, considering our financial situation and everything that we have to do just to take care of Bowen as it is, where are those resources going to come from, and how does that co-management work? So that's something that I'm concerned about. I think we really need to focus too on what do we, and we've done some of this, but what does the island look and feel like over the next 10 years in the various scenarios? we've got a lot of organic growth going on. And I'm not even sure we have a good handle on what we're gonna look like in 10 years if we just have that organic growth and kind of the status quo, keep it going, but we grow. And this is maybe, I don't know, Sue Ellen, you talked about relying on BC Ferry's planning projections. I don't know where they are in looking at our organic growth and what's going on there, but how we'll just, if we grow like we're growing in the next 10 to 20 years, which is the rest of my life, you know, so what does that look like and how well are we prepared to handle that? Then let's talk about it with just a day use park. So we've got organic growth plus day use. What does Bowen look like and feel like under that condition? And then we've got with the current proposal from Cape Archer Curtis. So organic growth plus day use plus overnight camping, right? And that's another scenario. So anyway, it's an awful lot on the table to envision, and our options are there. It's the idea of the ecosystem is an island, and it is all of Bowen Island and a community. And do we have the time? Can we envision what those different scenarios are going to look like to help make the decision?
Thank you. And then just to your piece about the deadlines. So what we know from what's in the public realm, there is an early May deadline, and then the materials that we have from Metro Vancouver, you know, the process would clearly extend beyond that. So both in their summary of the visitation and implementation document, it outlines the process of engagement, so particularly phase 2 and phase 3 that's coming online, and that moving in tandem with Bowen Island's rezoning and OCP amendment process. So in that, there's my sense of the situation is that there's jitters on both sides, right? Both for the dialogue that we've seen in our community, and then, you know, the faith that Metro Vancouver would need to put in this council and our governance structures to, you know, do we have enough resilience to actually sit and have this conversation in a constructive way and get at what this park could look like or what this project could look like. My feeling there is that I don't think we've gotten there yet. We haven't gotten to that constructive conversation. You know, we do call ourselves leaders. We very informed about what happens in our community. And I don't think we've gotten quite to the place where we're leading on this yet. Because there's really interesting questions for this project about what it could mean. It's, you know, we haven't gotten to answering or putting on the board what does next generation camping look like that's informed by our situation in the UNESCO biosphere, informed by sustainable development goals, that's consistent and congruent with the preserve and protect mandate of the Islands Trust. That's low impact, that really meets the needs of accessibility in all forms. And I haven't seen conversation on that yet, and we haven't gotten to answering that question. We haven't even generated a whole lot of excitement about putting that on the drafting table and being like, this could be exciting. So, you know, what we do need, and I think both Metro Vancouver and Bowen Island recognizes this, or our council recognizes this, that there's a bit of a need to reset the process and establish more trust between, you know, organizationally, but then also between the community and the stakeholder groups that we have on the island, so that we can have that foundation to actually get to those interesting and exciting questions.
Possible?
I do.
Yeah, okay.
I do. I think, and if it's not possible, I think that that portends some danger in the strategy that we have for our community, and actually the orientation that we want to move in. We need to get to a place where we're shining the light on what we want to grow. Right? Because if you put the light there, things grow. If we just focus on what we want to weed out of the garden, we're going to be weeding forever. Right? So there's a bit of a shift that has to happen, and I think we can get there. You know, I think we're, you know, but it's very embryonic, and the spark is very small, and it's something that needs to be nurtured and done with care, particularly as we're a small island and Metro Vancouver can be a bit of an elephant at times. But I think there's ways to work in that.
Again, let me know if I can do anything to help.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. Hawking.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks also for the opportunity to speak. I wasn't planning to speak, so I don't have prepared notes or anything, but I'm responding to what I've heard over the last hour or so. And so 4 points. First of all, I want to thank staff for the work. There's a lot of evening meetings, a huge amount of mountain of information to try to distill down, and I think they're doing a great job of that, so I want to thank them for that. Second, just responding to Councillor Getty and some of the other comments about, yes, we want to protect this land. We're not exactly sure how that should look, but we need to go to the next step. And so we need to give it first reading, so I absolutely support that. And the amendments that Councillor Morris and Fast is suggesting, I support that as well. Third, Councillor Morris mentioned we don't have a whole lot of information from Metro yet. But as Councillor Morris said, typically that happens later. That's when you're starting to develop the plan. Once you know you've got a plan, then you start to develop it. So that's when we're going to see a whole lot more. And I think probably the most important thing I heard this morning was the discussion from our CEO and planner about how to turn a phased approach, not into how to develop dates that are based on performance rather than just dates. We saw what Metro have, which is excellent, a year, starting in 05, or starting in 2025, then a couple of years later, then a couple of years later, so lots of time. But it's not the date that we're looking for, it's the performance that we're looking for. So the work that our CAO is talking, I know he's talking to the CAO at Metro Vancouver about that. I think that's really important, and that allows time to have the kinds of discussions that we need that actually are going to take place over years, not in the next couple of weeks. The next couple of weeks are important for moving this process forward. After that, it's some years of work to make this work for, as some have said, the social ecology of our community as well as the physical ecology of our community. So I'm very much looking forward to moving forward on this. I'm so hoping that we can have that land protected, and I actually love camping, and I want my kids to be able to camp there. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Hawking. And at that, thank you to the community for showing up and just participating in the process and hanging on and looking to be constructive. I appreciate it. And now we will, after that little move on, having the train move on to the siding, we'll come back to the main meeting, and I believe Councillor Fast was seeking to make a motion.
Yes, thank you. I'll put the motion on the table. I move that the committee as a whole recommend that council direct staff to bring a report. I'm reading right from the recommendations on the page. I'm just going to add a little bit at the end of number 1, just so people are ready. That the committee of the whole recommend that council direct staff to bring a report to the April 24th regular council meeting with number 1, draft bylaws to amend the official community plan and land use bylaw to permit the Metro Vancouver proposal for a regional park at Cape Roger Curtis with overnight use of up to 100 campsites. 2, any updates on responses to referrals made at the February 27th council meeting? That's my motion.
So before I look to a seconder, is there any councillors that wish to amend the language to that? Seeing none, is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Morse. Any discussion on this recommendation? Councillor Fast?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just speak briefly to my motion. I've said a lot today and I won't say much more except that we've got the success story of Crippen Regional Park purchased 40 years ago. People don't generally bring vehicles to that part. I see the idea of a Cove to Cape Greenway multi-use pathway being perhaps a joint venture or some performance or agreement for that part of the project that may be linked to the capacity or the phasing or something. I think the public investment of $40 million in Bowen Island's future and a park for the future of not just Metro Vancouver, but of Bowen Island too, because we tend to be 50% of the users compared on Crippen anyway, and I know a lot of people use Cape Roger Curtis walking around there today. And then the last point I just want to make is, what's the alternative? Is we don't have good alternatives for curbing tourists or increasing numbers of visitors or managing them either, really. We've got bed and breakfasts and short-term vacation rentals scattered all across the island. Last I saw, it was a number 287 sticks in my mind. I'm not sure if that's true, but I think this gives us an alternative, a way to manage at least one stream of visitors to the island and set ourselves up with the Greenway multi-use pathway that they've talked about as one tool to help reduce traffic problems with the ferry and on the roads. So that's, I'm just speaking in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Any discussion on that, Councillor Wick?
I'm feeling like we need to at least have a discussion about sending a message, a clear message to Metro. Because I think there is a bit of a void there in terms of them hearing from this council as to what we're moving forward. So I think it's great that we're going to proceed as we've outlined here. And I don't know if this is the place for it or talk about it after, about how we send a message encapsulating exactly this conversation today to the entire Metro.
Okay. Maybe let's work through this motion first, and then we can talk about the support. And then I've also got an additional recommendation around some co-management pieces. Any discussion on the motion? Oh, Councillor Getty, my apologies. You are
just
also
start waving my hand. Okay. The date of April the 24th. We've got this meeting. There's a Metro Vancouver Regional Park Board meeting on the 19th. I believe there's a Metro Board meeting a week or however, a few days after that. And they're potentially going to be making some recommendations and maybe some decisions about this land deal completing. At least that's certainly the rumor that's going around. Is April the 24th a realistic? I'm not sure that staff should be beavering away on this and working hard if Metro pulls the plug. So if and whether or not we're going to have any of these reports that we need from BC Ferries in particular, and possibly amendments to the Bunt report. And we still haven't heard anything from Squamish Nation people. So the 24th just seems to be cramming it a little bit. And whether we should leave that out so that it's whether we need a date certain or whether we leave it up to staff in terms of getting more ducks in a row. So I'm not suggesting an amendment, but I'm wondering if one is needed with respect to that specific date.
maybe I'll look to our CAO if he wishes to make a comment on staff time in the process.
Well, I would just recommend that we continue to move forward. If council chooses to direct staff to draft a bylaw, that staff continue to do the work that's needed to get us to April 24th with that bylaw. So
okay,
I wouldn't recommend putting tools down and waiting.
Okay. Councillor Morse?
First reading is first reading, and all the studies and things that we're wanting don't need to be there before first reading. They need to be back before second and third reading. The date of April 24th, we've passed a resolution today, which would get confirmed at council tonight, so the Metro Board will know what our intentions are for April 24th. And they have a Metro Board meeting set for Friday, April the 28th, which is after our April 24th meeting.
It's actually two meetings. There's the April
Yeah,
21st, which
yeah.
is a special board meeting, and then a regular board meeting.
Exactly, but
April 28th.
we've signaled we're going to put this bylaw on the table, and by the time they have their board meeting on the 28th, we will have done one or the other with that bylaw. Hopefully, first reading.
Councilor Wake.
I just want to second that. I think it's as part of what I was speaking to earlier. We need to send the message that we're committed to this process. And I think the best way we can do that is to set it up for the 24th. And all those considerations, there's so much more that comes after that. But I think we've signaled that we're committed.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 Carries unanimously. Just ask the corporate officer to ensure that it's noted as unanimous. I would also like to move a recommendation, just given my own experience in the last few months of taking over the role of the Metro Vancouver Municipal Director for Bowen Island, as well as the Mayor. It's been very challenging at times to thread the needle and shuttle the loom back and forth between those two organizations. And it's been really stressful, really passionate. I've learned a lot along the way, but I think we're hearing calls for some kind of more established joint collaboration on the issue. And I would like to ask council to seek some support in putting that together so that we can have some help both from our council, from our community, as well as Metro Vancouver in shepherding whatever this process that is going to unfold will be. So my motion here will be that council recommend that Metro Vancouver establish a joint steering committee for the proposed Cape Roger Curtis Park rezoning and OCP amendment that includes representation from the Metro Vancouver, I have this written for you, the Metro Vancouver Regional District Board of Directors, the MVRD Regional Parks Committee, MVRD Regional Park staff, Bowen Islands Council, Bowen Island staff, and the Bowen Island Conservancy for the purposes of better communicating and leading the rezoning and OCP amendment process between MVRD and Bowen Island. So the intent of that is recommending that Metro Vancouver establish some sort of committee as this process unfolds to have a more fulsome representation between Bowen Island, its council, its staff, Metro Vancouver, Board of Directors, its committee, and its staff, so that we have both electeds and staff together in one room, on at least a monthly basis as this unfolds and as the loops come up that need to be closed, and hopefully as we can get answers as well and comment. Seconded by Councillor Wake.
I'm just curious about the wording Metro Vancouver established rather than a joint steering committee be established.
It will require, Metro Vancouver is the proponent of the application, so it's just, I feel that it's up to, the onus is on them to establish and strike that committee, particularly if it's going to have representation from their board, committee, and staff.
And did this resolution have the standard wording in the front of it that the committee of the whole recommended to council? So we will have time to cogitate on it for the next 6 hours.
That's a great word, cogitate.
Yeah.
Can I hear the motion again? I just was trying to keep it up. I missed some parts.
That the committee of the whole recommend to council, or sorry, can you read the initial part, Sophie?
That the committee of the whole recommend that council.
Council recommend that Metro Vancouver establish a joint steering committee for the proposed Cape Roger Curtis Park rezoning and OCP amendment that includes representation from the Metro Vancouver, the MVRD Board of Directors, the MVRD Regional Parks Committee, the MVRD Regional Park staff, Bowen Islands Council, Bowen Island Municipality staff, and the Bowen Island Conservancy for the purposes of better communicating and leading the rezoning and OCP amendment process between MVRD and Bowen Island.
Thank you.
Councillor Getty?
I like it. I'll vote in favor.
Thank you. Councillor Wake?
I think that this is a very positive step, and thank you for bringing it forward. I think it speaks to pretty much everything we've been talking about today, which is trust, collaboration, an interactive process. And it's something we've all been struggling with, is that it seems to be this us and them, they go away, we go away, everybody gets mad. And we need to bring that into a more collaborative working process, build the trust, and get to a stage where it's no longer a concern that we're going to get railroaded or they're going to get a big red stoplight. We're going to work through all these things, large and small, together, and we're going to have to get along enough to make it all work. And ultimately, we all want the same thing. We want it to be a successful park. We want preservation and protection.
Mm-hmm.
We want connection. So,
Thanks.
Can you just read me the beginning of that motion again, please, Sophie?
That the committee of the whole recommends that council recommend that Metro Vancouver establish.
So we should say recommend to council, that council recommend.
That the committee of the whole recommends that council recommend.
No, recommend to council, that council recommend. Which I think was the same reading.
Any further discussion on the motion?
Do we have a seconder?
Seconded by Councillor Wake.
Oh, good.
Yep.
I missed it.
Okay. Seeing that, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, carries unanimously. I'm not sure, Councillor Wake, if you wanted to have a discussion about,
It's, school kids are going to be here in a few minutes.
oh, in 13 minutes. Or did you want to talk about that at regular council tonight?
I thought we could talk about it now and then recommend to council tonight.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's hear it. We've got some time.
So I think we really need to send a clear message, because the message that right now that I understand that Metro's getting, especially at the board level, is fuzzy. It's some no, some yes, a lot of in between, but where do we really stand? And I think we didn't have the understanding, a month ago that we have today, but there's been a lot of discussion, we've had a lot of very constructive and helpful letters from the community. And I think we need to just try to encapsulate that in a letter to Metro Board. In simple terms, saying that the community would like to pursue the possibility of a park, and that we are committed to the process that we're already engaged in to get there, or something to that effect.
Okay. Councillor Morse?
Well, given these resolutions, to me, sending a relatively short letter, enclosing the resolutions and signifying that we're committed to working collaboratively going forward is what's needed. Not a 2 or 3 page separate letter that doesn't include these resolutions.
I would offer that there is some confusion or misunderstanding at the Metro Vancouver board table about council's intentions. And in addition, that table is very busy. So Cape Breton Curtis is taking up some oxygen in those rooms. However, there's a lot going on in the region that's just come out of close to a $2.5 billion budget process, and that has to deal with a whole bunch of things. My belief would be that a letter that describes an openness to continuing the process, and then maybe has some of the actual things that we would need to get there would be helpful for board members if they could parse it in a page and a half or 2 pages.
Just a quick question. How many people are on the board and the Parks Committee, and how much overlap is there?
There's some overlap. There's, Metro Vancouver is actually 4 boards because it's a water and sewage district, as well as a housing corporation. So it's about, 42, 44 at any given time on those boards that represent 20 some odd municipalities across the region. There is some overlap between the Parks Committee and the board. So about half of the Parks Committee members or 2/3 of the Parks Committee members also sit on the board of directors.
Thank you. I'm just in favor of the letter idea, if I can continue. Sorry. Because I think I'm imagining other councillors in different parts of the region, far-flung parts of the region, who also have all their own things from their local areas on their people calling them and on their agendas. And I think being really clear and positive about working together, I think would be really helpful. Yeah. So I support the idea of a letter, and whether it has these motions that we just passed in it or not, I mean, they need to go together somehow. Yeah. And so however that can work, I support the idea of a letter.
I would also offer that it would be useful for our community as well. So I think having some of the reasoning fleshed out in that letter of supporting the process, but not outright supporting a rezoning or a park or like a foregone conclusion of the process. That also outlines some of the themes that we've heard are pretty consistent, that outlines some of what we need answers on, would help the community as well. And particularly my role in the community is, the chief spokesperson saying, really clearly, this is what council supports. We're not, outright in favor of rubber stamping a rezoning and OCP amendment, but we see value in the project, and we would really like to collaborate on the process, because it's the process that needs a big reset before we can start to shine a light on what we want to grow in the project itself.
That's great, because then the letter will add like a little extra punctuation around our motions.
Well, the letter kind of serves as like the executive summary of everything that's happening in the community, right? In an easily digestible way. And we'll have, I'm sure that there's folks from Parks and Parks Committee and Metro Vancouver board and staff watching this meeting right now wondering, how's this going to go? They'll be watching our council meeting tonight. But it's, the letter provides the context and gives myself as the mayor and the Metro Vancouver municipal director some really clear talking points as to what it is you folks around the table believe. Because I also want to be representing the will of council strongly and consistently and in no uncertain terms as well.
So we need a motion.
Yeah, so do you have a motion, Councillor Wood?
I haven't written one down.
At the committee of the whole, recommend to council that.
I'm just wondering if it should have a whereas, but maybe not. So the committee of the whole recommend to council that council, mayor and council write a letter to the Metro Vancouver board and the Parks Committee outlining what we feel, outlining our support, indicating our support for continuing the process of a rezoning to create the park.
Councilor Morris.
You don't need a rezoning to create the park.
Of their application for a new park?
Well,
Okay, so I'll ask the corporate officer to read what we have now so that we're still staying on the same thread.
That the committee of the whole recommends to council that mayor and council write a letter to the Metro Vancouver Board of Directors and the Parks Committee indicating support for continuing the process. ...
Yeah. For the development of the park at Cape Roger Curtis, including camping. What I would support, and then the resolutions are attached. And it's got to be no longer than 2 pages. You can read it quickly, being as they're busy people. And this is going to be. What's the timeline for agenda submission?
Today.
So what we have written now is that the committee of the whole recommends to council that mayor and council write a letter to the MVRD board and the Parks Committee indicating support for continuing the process for development of a regional park at Cape Roger Curtis. Park with camping at Cape Roger Curtis. And outlines the themes of those concerns and considerations.
You could just have a period at the end of CRC.
Okay.
Roger Curtis. Otherwise, we're going to write the letter.
Well, if we're all coming from all of us, we're going to have to see the final version and approve it. So somebody's going to write that between now and then.
Yeah.
Right.
And my intention for adding themes of concern and consideration is that just for the clarity of language, that it's not that we have support for continuing the process. Right, so we're not committing to full support of park and camping.
Process.
Yeah.
Keep going.
The process.
Of course, yeah.
Continuing the process, read the development of the process with respect to a park at Cape Roger Curtis.
I'll have the corporate officer read it out one more time and then we'll massage any language and then look for a second.
Yes, it's that the committee of the whole recommends.
I am so sorry, Councilor Getty. The floor is yours.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Is this a covering letter including the other recommendations that the COW just made? I think it's one bundle, personally. I'd like to include them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, I'll have the corporate officer read the motion and then we'll look for a seconder.
Council that mayor and council write a letter to the Metro Vancouver Regional Parks Committee indicating support for continuing the process for development of a regional park with camping at Cape Roger Curtis.
And including the resolutions.
And including the resolutions.
Related to the Cape Roger Curtis. Proposed Cape Roger Curtis Park.
From this meeting, from the meeting.
Yeah.
Committee of the whole Tuesday.
Well, it's going to be from the meeting tonight.
Is this, I'm wondering if the mover still moves this.
Well, I heard the term cover letter. So to me, we could send a cover letter that had the resolutions and then the letter.
Has to be all one.
Might be more than 2 pages.
Well, it can't be. You've got to think about the audience. Short and sweet.
For the sake of time and knowing that this is going to come back up this evening, how about we leave a period at the end of Cape Bridger Curtis as suggested by Councillor Fast? There's additional pieces because we'll be actually passing along the resolutions. The resolutions haven't been passed by council yet, so we'll be passing along the resolutions at our regular council meeting tonight. We can add that language this evening. Acceptable? All right, so we'll read the resolution one more time. We'll look for a seconder and then we'll call the question.
So that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that Mayor and Council write a letter to the Metro Vancouver Board and the Regional Parks Committee indicating support for continuing the process for development of a regional park with camping at Cape Bridger Curtis.
Second.
Second by Councillor Fast. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye. 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 Carries unanimously. Okay.
I think I hear kids.
I hear kids, and I will, item 4 on the agenda, I will look for a motion to adjourn. So moved by Councillor Wake, seconded by Councillor Jurgensen. Discussion, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. Thank you very much, council, as well as community that has shown up here today and those that are online.